That's fine. Okay, so we are now very excitedly starting Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges. Judges refers to the period before the Jewish people had an official king. Moses, and Yehoshua after him, they served as the kings. Actually, they may have actually had the halachos of the technical king that the Jewish people have a mitzvah to appoint. But after the death of Joshua, there was no king. There was no king, and the Shoftim, although it means judge, which means they would litigate things, they would sit on Sanhedrin often, but in our context, when we talk about Shoftim, as we'll see through the book, it refers to the leaders, the people who are meant to guide Bnei Yisrael, and not necessarily the technical judges. Some of them were on the Sanhedrin, others we'll find were not on the Sanhedrin. The Shofet here means, like, was it last week's parsha? Mi samcha l'sar v'shofet aleinu. Who put you as a shofet over us? They said to Moshe when he protested when one fellow was trying to hit his friend. A shofet there meant who put you as a leader above us. So the Shoftim we'll be learning about are the leaders of the Jewish people. But before we get to the actual Shoftim that led, the book first wants to put into context where we're holding. The Jewish people had just conquered the land and divided the land, which is the entire book of Yehoshua, the 14 years, including the 7 years of conquest and the 7 years of dividing the land. That's the entirety of the book of Joshua. And at the very end of the book of Yehoshua, Yehoshua dies. Now we enter the period of the Shoftim, and chapter 1 sets us up. For your information, the actual prophet who wrote down and recorded the prophecy of the book of Shoftim, anybody know? I'll put it as a pop quiz. Who wrote down the book of Shoftim?
Shmuel.
Very good. Yes, there's the prophet Shmuel, who lived shortly after the events occurred. Excellent. Yehoshua wrote his own book, and Shmuel is now writing the book of Shoftim, as well as others, which we'll God willing get to. So, chapter 1 of Sefer Shoftim opens up, Vayehi, and it was after the death of Yehoshua, Vayishalu b'nei Yisrael, B'Hashem lemor miyale lanu el haKanani. The Jewish people asked of Hashem, who will go up to fight against the Canaanites? Batchila leilachem bo, who will be first to rise up against the Canaani? So what this verse describes is after the death of Joshua, there was still leftover work to be done, a lot of work left over to be done to conquer the rest of the enemies that dwelled within the land of Canaan. All the locals, the Canaanites, the 7 Canaanite nations, which we were commanded to eradicate and to destroy their idolatry and not give them a hold in the land. Yeshua started the job with us, and now it was our job to continue it after his death. And the question was, who is going to start the conquest? Which is interesting. We haven't really seen such a thing before. We saw the wars throughout the period of Joshua. They never once consulted with the Urim V'Tumim. They never consulted the prophet who should go first, who should go second, because at that time Joshua was running the show. Joshua had a direct link to God. He didn't have to ask the Urim V'Tumim, the Kohen Gadol with his breastplate. He didn't have to inquire of the Shekhinah. Hashem was telling him directly and giving him direct guidance. He would gather, and they were fighting as a nation together. And now suddenly we're finding individual tribes conquering their own territories and taking turns at that. So that explains to us really the first word of this book is Vayehi. Vayehi, Chazal, see in that the word Vay, like we say Oy vey, Oy vay voy. It's a language of pain. Vayehi implies that this was a period of pain and difficulty for the Jewish people. What was the difficulty? The difficulty was the very fact that they had to ask the Urim V'Tumim. There was no longer a leader, Joshua, who had absolute clarity of what to do and where to go. They lacked direction, they lacked leadership, and they were asking because it is now essential to get guidance. Excuse me? Yeah. And they wanted to know who should go up first. This was important. The Ralbag explains the first battle after the death of Joshua is going to set the pace and determine the morale of the people. We don't want to blow it right off the bat. The leader has died. All the Canaanites probably heard, the Jews are on shaky ground. What's going to happen next? Are they still going to be successful militarily? So it was very important that they take the correct steps. So that they consulted with the Shekhinah. It says that they inquired of Hashem. That means that they went to the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol asked, wearing his Urim V'Tumim, the special breastplate that had the 12 stones for the tribes. And the way the request would work, the Ramban describes, is the Kohen Gadol would ask of Hashem a particular question. So in this case, the question was, who will go up first to battle our enemies? And the answer came, Vayomer Hashem in verse number 2, Yehuda Ya'aleh. Yehuda will go up. So how does the Urim V'Tumim speak to us? So the actual stone above the name of Yehuda, on the breastplate it said Yehuda, and above that was his particular tribal stone. That stone lit up above there, or excuse me, the letters Yehuda lit up on the breastplate, and then the letters Ya'aleh, Yud, Ayin, Lamed, Hey from the other names. For example, you'd get the Yud from Yisachar, perhaps the Ayin from Shimon, the Lamed from Naphtali, and so on. They all lit up. So in a sense, really, it wasn't a full and complete message when you consulted the Urim V'Tumim. There needs to be some deciphering, because you could arrange the letters that are lit up in many different ways. A famous example of this is the mistake that we have in the beginning of Shemuel, when Eli, the Kohen, consults the Urim V'Tumim regarding Chana. He sees there seems to be a drunk lady here. He consults the Urim V'Tumim, and sure enough, the letters light up, Shikora. The Urim V'Tumim, the way they worked was, the lights would light up, the lights of the particular letters on the Kohen Gadol breastplate would light up, but you would have to know how to decipher them. So a classic case where this was mistaken was when Eli HaKohen asked the Urim V'Tumim about Chana, as we'll see in the book of Shmuel, and the letters that lit up over there were Shin, I'll spell them out for you, were these letters. I have to write in script to make it easier for myself, you forgive me. There's Shin, Chaf, Resh, it's hard to spell with a mouse, and Hey. Okay, these letters lit up. Let's say it was the Shin from Shimon, the Chaf from Yisachar, the Resh from Yisachar, and the Hey from Yehuda, let's say. Okay, the question is, how do you decipher this? Because in the letters in this order, they actually might spell the word Shikora, that she's drunk. That she's drunk. So Eli said, look, the letters lit up and she's drunk. It was and he went to chastise her. However, he later discovered that in fact the order of the letters was meant to be like this. He simply misdid the deciphering. What is that spelled? Anybody know? Chaf Shin Resh Hey.
Keshera.
Keshera. Alternatively, Kesara. She is kosher, or she is like Sarah Imenu. He read the orders in the incorrect. He read the letters in the incorrect order. So in order to use the Urim V'Tumim, you have to have, first of all, a Kohen Gadol who can make the request. He also has to have the divine insight to interpret the message properly. So in this case, you have to know which letters to put in which order. Seems to be a funny setting on the camera. I'm wearing like a costume. That's okay. Oh, I see what's happening here. Got it. All right, pardon my costume. We're a little bit advanced for reporting. All right, now let's get back to work here. So the answer comes back, Yehuda Yahaleh. Let Judah go up to start the conquest. Yehuda is always leading the Jewish people, and here he is once again. And Yehuda does something interesting. He turns to Shimon, Achiv, his brother, and he says, since you went up with me in my portion, let's go up together to fight the war against the enemies within our territory. Yehuda took along with him the tribe of Shimon to conquer their territory. As we learned in the book of Joshua, Shimon did not merit his own isolated portion in Israel, his own connected piece of land, Rather, his territories were scattered throughout throughout the portion of Yehuda in the south. That is in accord with Yaakov's blessing. Achelkem be Yisrael, afitzem be Yaakov, or the reverse of that. Shimon was scattered throughout Yehuda. So here, Yehuda said to Shimon, "Hey, let's go together, and we'll conquer the enemies within our midst."
Who is doing the talking?
I suppose in this particular verse, when Yehuda approaches Shimon,
Yeah.
I assume it was the leaders of the tribe consulting with one another.
Not the individuals that are Joseph's brothers.
No, because if you think those were long dead, they had been
Hundreds of
buried.
years ago, yes.
Exactly. So when it says, it's interesting. It says, "Vayomer Yehuda leShimon." Yehuda said to Shimon, we're referring to the leader is called Yehuda because that's like his title.
Okay.
Very interesting. As we'll find, some of the places they conquer are Achiman, Sheshai, Talmai. Those are familiar names from us. Those are the giants living in Abraham's time. That was just the name of the leader of that particular area. It's like Paro is a generic term for the leader. Okay. So similarly here, the term for the leader of Yehuda is Yehuda.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That clarifies it.
Yes. So the Mefarshim say, the Art Scroll quotes the Malbim, but I did not see it there. They say that the reason Yehuda insisted that Shimon come along with him is because, as we know from Parshat Vayechi, which we read not long ago, Shimon did not get a blessing from Yaakov, but only a criticism. Your anger is too strong. I'm going to divide you amongst the Jews. And Yehuda was concerned that without the special blessing of Yaakov, Shimon would not be able to conquer his lands and overcome his enemy. So Yehuda said, I want to make sure that my brother Shimon, he's referred to him as his brother, he takes his brother with him and he says, here, come, you fight with me. You fight with Yehuda. I know that I have the blessing of Yaakov backing me, and I want to take you along with me in the battles. And that's what they did. And together, they conquered not all, but some of the enemies within their territory. They find a fellow in verse 5. They find a fellow named Adoni Bezek in a city called Bezek. Adoni Bezek was a king, but he is not one of the 31 kings listed in the book of Joshua that the Jews had to conquer. What this means is only the significant kings were listed over there, and he was like a minor king. But as we'll see, he was actually quite strong and big. He had subdued 70 other kingdoms. And even still, he was considered minor. So you look at the size of what the Jewish people were dealing with, in terms of the intensity of the armies that they had to face. So they find this fellow Adoni Bezek, and they do something very strange and unprecedented. They mutilate him. They seized him and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. That is a very strange thing to do. The Jewish people, we haven't found them torturing their enemies before, and not since this episode. After this episode, this was not like a precedent, and afterwards they do the same thing. This is a unique instance where they decided to torture their captive king, Adoni Bezek. So what is going on over here? Why did they torture him? So the Ralbag writes, perhaps what was going on in their mind was, this is our first battle after Joshua dies. We have to make an impression on the surrounding kingdoms that we're not here to play. We're here, we mean business, and we're here to fight. And they wanted to scare and impress the nations that they mean business. So they did this very terrible thing of mutilating the king. However, the Mefarshim point out, this was actually Hashgacha Pratis, as the Psukim themselves point out. Adoni Bezek does some self-reflection as he's sitting there, thumbless, no thumbs and no big toes. He realizes, I'm getting payback now from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem is paying me back for what I did to the 70 kings that I conquered. Adoni Bezek says, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off, used to glean under my table, as I did, so God did to me. He realized that he was getting paid back for what he had done. And he had cut off their thumbs and their toes. And so now this happened to him. So the Jewish people had their own calculation. But it was really Hashgacha, it was divine providence making it and arranging that this should happen to him. The Gaon of Vilna says that, in fact, that is why Hashem uses this, he has this format of midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Why is a person punished measure for measure? It's beyond fairness. Perhaps you can find him an amount of money that would be equal, fair to what he had done. But measure for measure the Gaon of Vilna explains, is also to wake up the person to realize, hey, oh, my foot is hurting because I did a misdeed with my foot. My thumbs were cut off, Adoni Bezek is saying, because I made a mistake. I sinned through cutting off others' thumbs. So the midah k'neged midah, the tit for tat, the measure for measure that Hashem employs, is actually to awaken the individual to teshuvah. And in this case, it works. Adoni Bezek repents. And because of that, we find another unusual thing. It says they brought him to Jerusalem in verse 7. They brought the king to Jerusalem and he died there. They did not execute him like they did all their other enemies. They appreciated the fact that he did teshuvah, and they wanted to show how important that is. And they moved him to Jerusalem, probably put him in some, like house arrest, and he died of old age. He died of old age. They were showing that we value people doing teshuvah, people repenting. And if all the nations had done so, when the Jews had initially entered, they would have been allowed to live in their midst, as we discussed. So it now goes on after the conqueror of Adoni Bezek. It talks about the wars that Judah had waged. And it reviews a lot of the things that we saw earlier. In fact, there's almost a word-for-word repetition of the conquest of a place called Kiryat Sefer. Kalev, who has that area, he says, whoever smites, this is in verse number 12, whoever smites Kiryat Sefer and conquers it, I shall give him my daughter Achsa as a wife. And this man named Othniel ben Kenaz, Kalev's younger brother, he conquers it, so he gives him his daughter Achsa as a wife. So this is an exact replica, almost word for word, from the book of Joshua, is now being facsimilated over here. So the Malbim says this is what Tiptaf Chazal to say, that there's more than a physical conquest happening over here. In addition to the physical conquering of a place called Kiryat Sefer, this is also alluding to another conquest of Othniel ben Kenaz, that he was able to restore the 3,000 forgotten halachos that they forgot during the days of Moshe's mourning. After Moshe had died, they were disturbed from their learning and their review, and they forgot 3,000 halachos. And Kalev said, whoever is spiritually great enough to restore those 3,000 halachos, what he referred to as Kiryat Sefer, Sefer is the book, like to use the book of the Torah to extract the halachos from it. Whoever is able to do that and shows that he's a spiritual giant, then I will give him my daughter. And that is indeed what happened. And the story is repeated here once for the physical conquest and once for this this learning attainment that he was able to retrieve the 3,000 halachos.
Same with Saul and David.
Yes, offering his daughter as a prize. Yes, very good. Okay, and so on. And now, in verse 16, as Yehuda is in the middle of waging wars, it says, Ubnei Keni, Choten Moshe, the sons of Keni, the Moses' father-in-law, that's Yisro, right? Alu me'ir Tmarim et Bnei Yehuda. They ascended from the land of Tmarim with Bnei Yehuda, and they went down to Midbar Yehuda. So what's happening here with Yisro's descendants? That's who we're talking about here. Yisro, which we're going to be reading about in a couple of weeks, he has descendants, and they were apparently living in a place called Irat Marim, and now they're moving down south to live with Yehuda. So this, Rashi brings a midrash. The sons of Yisro, they were converts. He was a convert, so his descendants had no share in the land. A convert basically had to rent from and live amongst any tribe that he chose. But out of respect for Yisro, they had portioned or assigned a particular plot of land to his descendants because they valued what he contributed to Am Yisrael, and he was Moshe's father-in-law, and the advice that he gave to Moshe. They apportioned a section called Irat Marim, the city of dates, for his descendants. What was this extra plot of land in Israel? How could you just, give up a plot of land? So it worked like this. Jerusalem, a section of Jerusalem would be built, would house the temple. That portion belonged to Binyamin. So Binyamin, in effect, would be losing the section where the temple is going to be built, because the temple now belongs to the entire Jewish people, not just to the tribe of Binyamin. So what they did was they took a 500 by 500 amma plot of land, which basically equals the area of the temple, and they said, when the temple is built, you will have that size land in a place called Jericho. In Jericho, there's a place called the Irat Marim, and they apportion that land that in the future, after 440 years, when the temple is built, the children of Binyamin will have like a replacement, a consolation for the land that they lost where the temple was. In the meantime, that land is going to be sitting there for 440 years unused. So they said, let's give that to the sons of Yisro, the descendants of Yisro. They got this plot of land called Irat Marim. And it was apparently, it's not such a big area. 500 by 500 cubits is pretty small. But apparently it was a very rich soil, and they were able to gain a sustenance from it. It's not that they all fit in there physically, but they probably had a lot of farms and fields over there that they were able to make a big parnasa from. So they apportioned that land to the descendants of Yisro. And now we find them leaving and going down south to join Yehuda. So Rashi cites that although they had a great parnasa from the land that they were given as a gift by the Jews, they desired to be close to Otniel ben Kenaz. After they saw his great achievement of restoring the forgotten halachas, which was just mentioned in the previous verses, they decided, you know what, it's nice living over here, but we prefer to be with the Talmidei Chachamim. They went down to learn and apprentice Otniel ben Kenaz. Yeah? So far, so good. That makes sense?
Oh, it's a little hard to follow all the names and
Oh, forgive me. You know what? You're right. I got time to prepare, and but so
written it first.
Essentially, what happened was there's the descendants of Yisro were given a plot of land in Jericho. Out of gratitude for Yisro, his descendants got a plot of land. This plot of land was earmarked for the future Benjaminites who would be giving up a portion of their land for the temple. So they earmarked this area in Jericho for those people. But in the meantime, they gave that land to the descendants of Yisro. And here, that's where we're discovering it in these verses over here. And they decided, you know what, there's a great Talmid Chacham living in the south. We're going to descend southward to go learn from him and forego our place in this land. Or at least some of them did, the students. Okay. And then it goes on to discuss the conquering of Yehuda. But in verse number 19 is a strange turn of events. It says in verse number 19, Hashem was with Yehuda, Vahi Hashem es Yehuda, Vayoresh es Sahar, and he conquered the mountain. Ki lo laharish et yoshvei ha'emek, ki reche barzel lehem. But they did not conquer the valley, because in the valley they had iron chariots. So all the commentaries are disturbed by this. Yehuda conquered the mountain, but did not conquer the valley. They left a portion of Israel, of their territory, unconquered, the valley. The commentaries are bothered that the mountain is much more difficult to conquer than the valley. For the mountain, you're working uphill, they could be throwing stuff down at you, and they have a much bigger advantage strategically. If Yehuda was able to conquer the enemy living on the mountain, he certainly should be able to conquer the valley. Now you're on the top, and you can rain down your weapons and missiles, etc. How could it be that you conquer the mountain, not the valley? I wonder. So there are two approaches here. Each one of them, I think, is obviously revealing an aspect of the truth. The Malbim says that Yehuda should have seen that God was with him when he conquered the mountain, but he still had fear in his heart. They saw the iron chariots, they saw the strong tanks, so to speak, of the enemy, and they suddenly got nervous. Are we able to do this or not? They felt anxious and unsure about their capabilities. And that was a mistake. The moment they felt fear, like Hashem said, do you really think it's in your hands? This is me fighting the wars anyway. You're just going through the motion. He did not give them the ability to conquer the valley at that point. So that's really the two different commentaries threaded together. Hashem was trying to make a point I want to do something that's illogical. I'm going to give you the stronger, I'm going to give you a bigger military victory, and you're going to lose the smaller military battle. I'll make you be successful in the hard one, but the easy one you're not going to be able to do, to show that God is really the one that's doing the fighting over here. That's this message hidden in verse number 19. God is sending home a message. The moment you start feeling anxious, can I do it? Am I going to be able to do it? You're putting your own efforts at the fore, and you're saying, it's not really God doing it, it's me doing it. So God says, oh yeah, so let me show you something. I'll conquer the mountain for you, but you won't be able to do the smaller job of conquering the valley. So it shows already a little bit of a lack of faith on the side of the Jewish people, coming from the greatest tribe, the tribe of Yehuda. Okay, now from verse 21 until the end of chapter 1, it will go through each tribe and talk about their failings, basically, their lack of ability to conquer and get rid of the enemies within their territories, respectively. So, for example, in verse number 21, it says, that the children of Binyamin did not drive out the Yevusi that was living in Yerushalayim. And the Yevusi sat there in their midst until this day that Shmuel was writing the book. And then it goes on to verse number 22. And so in verse number 22, this is noteworthy. It says the Beit Yosef, the children of Yosef, which is Menashe and Ephraim, they joined together. They went up to a place called Beit El, and Hashem was with them. So they did some fighting. They spied Beit El, and the name of the city in early times had been Luz. The lookouts saw a man leaving the city of Luz, and they said to him, show us the approach to the city, and we shall deal kindly with you. So what happened here is, there was a city which now is known as Beit El, formerly was known as Luz. The Mefarshim explained Luz means, anybody know what the word Luz is? Luz, not in English, but in Hebrew. Luz, I can't hear Rabbi Paul. It sounds like you have an answer there.
Is it light? And is it anything to do with light? No.
Light? Not
No,
that I know.
That's in Spanish, I think, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. I would
Lamed Vav Zion, right?
Yes, exactly. Lamed Vav Zion. Luz
does that mean
actually,
foreigner, a foreigner? Like
like
Loaziz.
Laz, like Loaz. Loaz,
Yeah.
very nice. Same letters. Here, interestingly enough, one of the bones of the body is also referred to as Luz. Moshe Katz is here.
Yeah.
He pointed that out. Here, the translation is walnut. Now, Luz, even in modern Hebrew, is a walnut, a Luz nut. The reason is that walnut has a very hard shell. It's encased. This city of Luz was completely encased. In fact, the entrance was not readily apparent. Nobody could see the entrance. So the Jewish people did not know how to attack this fortified city. There were no gates leading into it. They didn't know where the entrance was even. So they asked the man, they saw a man and they said to him, show us the approach to the city and we won't kill you. They saw one of the locals and they said, please point us in the right direction. He showed them the approach to the city. The Mefarshim say he did not speak. He was afraid of getting caught by anybody listening. All he did was point a finger in the direction of the gate. It was hiding in a cave that was like camouflaged behind walnut trees. And he pointed them in the right direction, and sure enough, they go and overtake the city, but they released the man and his entire family, and they let this individual and his family live. The man went to the land of the Hittites. He built a city and called it Luz. He restarted another city and named it Luz, which is the city that he originated from. And that is its name until this day. So this city of Luz that he built, it emphasizes it's the name of that city until this day. Rashi, or the Mefarshim, bring a remarkable midrashim about this city named Luz. This city named Luz, like its predecessor Luz that the Jewish people had just conquered, was a fortified city. But the fortification here was a spiritual one. It says, even the angel of death could not penetrate the city of Luz. People would live there forever. It says when an old person got katz nafsho, or I forgot the expression. The old person basically was tired of being alive. He would walk out of the city gates, and then the angel of death would be able to take him. Luz was this like specially fortified place that had this bracha of longevity for the inhabitants. So the Mefarshim point out, look at the reward that this man got. Not only was he saved, but he got to establish this city, which had this amazing spiritual property where people wouldn't die there. And that was the place that they would go to color the tzitzis wool with techeles, the special blue dye. That was a city that was used for many, many generations to come. What was his great merit? What did he do? He simply pointed his finger in one direction to help the Jews conquer the city. All he had to do was extend a finger, and here he is given infinite reward. And that's trying to impress upon the people reading the book of Shoftim, and perhaps upon the people who knew the story at the time, that if you stick with the Jews and you stick with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, you're in good hands. Hashem will take care of you and He will repay you. I once heard a fantastic story. There's a rabbi in Israel, one of the great Sephardic leaders, is Rav Ben Sion Mutzafi. His father, Rav Salomon Mutzafi, was a spectacular person. Endless stories about what a pious man he was. And Rav Ben Sion related that once his sister, they were on like a road trip, and I think it was him and his sister or some of the family members, the younger members of the family, they were in a playful mood, and they saw a man on the road, and they said, hey, tell us, do you know where Chacham Baruch lives? They made up some name. Do you know where Chacham Baruch lives? And this passerby, you must mean so-and-so. He lives over there. And he sent them along their way. And they went off giggling because this person that they asked for didn't really exist. And he must have just, gotten a mistaken address. And they were off giggling. And later at the dinner table, they're sharing the story. And the father of Salomon Mutzafi, he got so upset. He was a very intense person. And he said to them, after 120 years, this man is going to go to heaven, to Shemayim, and he's going to be expecting a reward for this deed that he had done today. He said, on such and such a day, these people couldn't find the house of Rabbi Baruch, and I directed them. And he's going to get there, and they're not going to reward him for it because you weren't actually asking for directions, you were just playing around. So you misled him to think that he had done a good deed. Okay, but Salomon Mutzafi had a real vision of the value of even giving somebody directions, even pointing somebody in the right direction is something that Hashem will reward and repay. And we're finding that over here in these verses in Shoftim, that because the man pointed Bnei Yosef in the right direction, he was given a tremendous reward of the city of Luz, the city where people never die, and so on. All these great accolades. Okay, so there we see the importance of giving directions, a helping hand, if you will. Then we move on. It goes on again, as we said in the rest of the chapter. Menashe did not drive out the inhabitants of Beit Sha'an, and it goes on. Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanite that was dwelling in Gezer, and it lists each particular tribe that he did not finish driving out his enemies. The most egregious, the most severe example of unfinished work on behalf of the Jews is the very end of the chapter, in verse number 34. As we've mentioned before, the tribe of Dan always comes last. They were last in the desert. And here they're also last, and you see them doing the worst error amongst the rest of the Jews. It says as follows, in verse number 34, the Emori forced the children of Dan up the mountain, for they did not let them descend to the valley. For the first time, we see not only is the enemy stationary, but they're even driving the Jews out. The Emori was determined to dwell in Har Cheret, Ayalon, and Shalavim, but the hand of the house of Yosef prevailed. So the Emori was fighting against the tribe of Dan. They actually won a few battles. So in comes Menashe and Ephraim, the sons of Yosef. They come to aid in the battle. So now the Jews subdue the enemy. But once they subdued them, they stopped. They did not go on to eradicate them and get rid of them. They left them there. After seeing already how severe the enemy could be and how dangerous it could be to have them in your midst, they just left them there. And they made them a tributary. Okay, just pay taxes to us, Emori, and you'll be safe. So this is setting up the stage, what we'll see in the coming chapters, that the Jews were too lax, and they were wrong to leave so many enemies behind. When Yehuda went up, they saw that God was with him. They saw that God was with the Bnei Yosef when they conquered the city of Beit El, the city of Luz. They should have realized God is with them and they should finish the job, but they did not finish the job. Perhaps they were too engaged in their farms and their fields and all the comforts that the land of Israel had to offer them. They didn't feel the pressure on their backs to finish the job just yet. And they're going to pay for that. They're going to pay for that. Let me quickly check the time. We'll have to hold it here. And God willing, we'll pick up from chapter 2 next week. Chapter 2 really is the introduction to the book of Shoftim. It will give us like a snapshot of everything that there is to come. So thank you for joining me tonight. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. I'll make sure to the best that I can that it won't happen again next week. But until then, have a wonderful Shabbat.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you.
Shalom, and thanks for learning. Good night.